Video games are popular and have been around for a long time. From arcade games to console games, everyone has at least played one video game in their life. Some of the more widely known games have been adapted for the big screen. However, most of those adaptations have not been successful, leading to people claiming that it is just not possible to take a game and turn it into a film.
Why isn't it possible?
It's just not.
Why not, you stupid bastard?
But that's what this video is about. Welcome, where we discuss the difficulty of adapting video game narratives into film. Before the modern era of gaming, games never really had a proper narrative story. Each game had a simple introduction story that got people interested in playing them.
With the strength of lords, they challenged the dragons.
But it wasn't the main focus of a game, the gameplay was. In recent times, this is the opposite. There are games which are being produced that are completely narrative driven. The story is the main purpose of the game, and the gameplay has become secondary. This begs the question, is it still impossible to turn a video game into a film? Well,
Falling back into my old ways. Angry. Distrustful. With you. Now and before. I chased you away.
no. Most video games nowadays, with a few exceptions, are made in a similar way to that of a film. Each game has a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Main characters, supporting characters, and side characters. Basically, every game is a blueprint for itself if it were to be adapted into a film for the big screen. The one thing that can't be adapted is the gameplay mechanics, obviously, but that will be discussed later. Scriptwriters for films, for some reason, find it very challenging to write a movie based on a video game. Many films were produced and released based on a successful video game, ended up not doing so well. An example of this would be the Resident Evil movies that came out during the early 2000s, featuring the main star Milla Jovovich. The story of the games aren't complicated at all, at least the main plots of the story. They have, however, the movies, that is, have adapted the main elements of those games, such as the zombies, Umbrella Corporation, the company that was responsible for the outbreak, a few characters from the games, and the city where the zombie outbreak happened, Raccoon City. And that is all. Everything else shown in those movies has nothing to do with the story of the Resident Evil games, which is sad because the story is thrilling and exciting, dealing with survival and corporate greed.
Are you saying I was manufactured?
I was to become a god. Creating a new world with an advanced race of human beings. However, all was lost with Raccoon City.
There were two more attempts to adapt the Resident Evil games. A movie called Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City and a TV show called Resident Evil that was released on Netflix. The movie nearly succeeded in adapting the first two games of the series, but fell short because it was trying to adapt two games into a 1.5 hour long movie, making the story too convoluted with a lot of things happening. The series, on the other hand, had nothing to do with the games, except for a few recognizable characters. The story was uneventful, with nothing to follow, and it failed.
Crazy, thinking about the way I was that the heartbreak changed me, baby. But look at where I ended up.
A few other popular games have also been adapted into a movie, and they too have suffered the same fate. Examples like the Tekken movie that came out in 2009, Prince of Persia: Sands of Time, the Assassin's Creed movie, Silent Hill that was released in 2006, Street Fighter, Tomb Raider, and the list goes on. Now, for some, these movies are not bad. They are just poor adaptations, and some of these movies are just terrible films. Adapting the story of a video game is not hard. Some games are easily adaptable due to the way in which the game is played, which is like a movie. Here are some of those examples: The Last of Us, Life is Strange, Detroit Become Human, Uncharted, and all the games that people refer to as Tattletale games. All these games can be easily adapted into films because, as I've said, they play and follow the same structure to that of a film.
As mentioned earlier, every game has some sort of narrative to carry the gameplay forward. Even dating back as far as the arcade days, many of the games there had some narrative to explain why you, the player, are doing what you are doing. An example would be Ghouls and Goblins. A game with a narrative so simple, all they tell you is to save the princess, that's it, the game begins. Trying to create a narrative for a film around that would definitely be difficult for any writer. Earlier we had discussed which games would be easy to adapt into a film, and why that may be so.
Well, I suppose I should expect nothing less from half-breeds.
Don't call me a half-breed.
However, I will be explaining why some games may be difficult or even impossible to adapt into a feature-length film. This is because of one key thing that video games have that films do not, and that is interactive storytelling through gameplay mechanics. There are many games out there that would prefer to present their narrative not through visuals, but rather through gameplay and interactivity. An example of this would be a game called Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons. In this game, you play two brothers which are controlled each by two of the respective analog sticks. Throughout the game, the brothers would encounter many obstacles, one of which is a body of water. The younger brother can't swim, so the older brother helps him cross the body of water.
Mafi, Isada.
Iada?
Na Mafi, Badi na.
Tabi ana bisayen nai mata. Huh?
Valila.
However, later in the game, the older brother dies and the younger brother has to cross the body of water on his own. But the player can't swim in the water with the same analog stick used to control the younger brother. The player can only swim using the analog stick used for the older brother, which is a great way of using gameplay to convey to the player that the younger brother has to grow up if he wishes to continue the journey. This example shows how difficult it would be to recreate something like that in a film and expect to have the same effect. Another type of game that would be hard to adapt would be the type where the plot of the game is the player's own story in the game world, like Dark Souls.
Gwyn's mighty lords peeled apart their stone scales. The witches weaved great firestorms.
The plot of that game is not the journey of some character, but instead the player's journey throughout the world, and overcoming the impossible by never giving up. If this was to be adapted, it would not do very well, as there would not be much to adapt since the plot prioritizes the main character as a complete blank slate so that the player may put themselves into the character. Though these types of games may not have a main plot that is easy to adapt, they do have background stories that could be adapted as they work as explanations for the locations and characters mentioned by NPCs.
Heretic. First thou offendeth the Godmother, and now thou see fit to trample upon the tomb of the great Lord. I am the dark son of Gwyndolin. Let the atonement for thy felonies commence.
Although there may be games that are difficult to adapt, they are not impossible. However, there are a few games that may as well be impossible to adapt, one of which is called Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. A game where the main plot is given to the player in the very beginning of the game, that which is to defeat Ganondorf. The player can already end the game when they start, but they are encouraged to do a lot of stuff on the side to prepare for the final fight. Adapting such a game without completely changing the main plot would be impossible. Since turning a mostly player-driven experience into a film would mean having to condense hours and hours into 2.5 hour long film. Now that we know what games are easy to adapt and what games are hard or impossible to adapt, we can answer the question: are video games very difficult to adapt into a film? That, however, depends actually on the type of game you wish to adapt. If it was one of the examples from the first part of this video, then yes, it is easy to adapt, as it is literally a blueprint for a film. But if it was one of the examples from the second part of this video, then some will be difficult while some may even be impossible.